Welcome to the notes on biogeochemical cycles. This one is on the water cycle and the carbon cycle. Let's get started. In these video notes, we're going to go over Earth's spheres. We'll also talk about the flow of matter through biogeochemical cycles. We'll discuss the water cycle specifically and the carbon cycle too. All right, there she is. Let's talk about the big picture first, and we're going to do that right here in the biosphere. So the biosphere, think about all this area here where life can exist, right, is called the biosphere. All biotic components live in this area. It's where we are right now, if you think about it. The biosphere can range from about 20 miles from top to bottom and ranges from the deepest parts of the ocean all the way up to the highest peaks of the highest mountains. So that's where all of the biotic components exist in the biosphere. The other spheres are where all of the abiotic components exist. The hydrosphere is where all of the water, all the different bodies of water throughout Earth are. The lithosphere is the dirt, the earth, the soil, the rock beneath our feet. And the atmosphere exists all around us and above us as well. It contains all of the different gases that we breathe in every single day, including carbon dioxide as well, right, from combustion reactions. So in environmental science, oftentimes what we want to do is we want to think about how components can cycle through these four different spheres. And also during the notes today, I'm going to talk a little bit about that process. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about energy and matter. In terms of energy, the Earth is an open system. That means that the light energy coming in from the sun cycles through different processes on our Earth and will ultimately exit the system back into to space as the heat radiates out. So that's what energy looks like in our Earth. Well, matter is a different story. In terms of matter, Earth is a closed system. For the most part, there's no new inputs or no new outputs in terms of mass, more things coming in or leaving our system. So what that means for us here is that everything that we have here on Earth is set. It's what we have. So everything, all materials will ultimately be cycled and recycled through the lithosphere, atmosphere, biosphere, and hydrosphere in infinite number of times, really. I mean, think about this. The carbon that makes up our body has been around for billions of years, and we're only borrowing it right now. All of the carbon that we in our bodies came from the food that we ate, right? We're not going to get that back until, I suppose, we're dead, right? But we're just borrowing the carbon, kind of like that. It's a very sobering thought, isn't it? Anyway, matter, closed system. Let's talk about matter. The matter does not leave our system. The matter is cycled through the biosphere, lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere via different processes. Biological processes, think photosynthesis, cellular respiration. Geological processes, think burial or sedimentation. Sedimentation is when calcium carbonate, carbon-containing ion, will precipitate out of liquid and form rock, limestone. Chemical processes, think of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere diffusing into the ocean and creating that calcium carbonate. Look at those words, biogeochemical. That's how we get that name from, biogeochemical cycles. And let's talk a little bit about life's important elements. Carbon is 100% necessary for all of life. We also know nitrogen and phosphorus are necessary too. Sulfur is found in proteins. Phosphorus is found in DNA, in proteins as well. Nitrogen, DNA, proteins. Carbon in any macromolecular sugar. Hydrogen and water oftentimes is found in water. And that's where I want to start off first, is with the water cycle. Water is essential to life, and it makes up about half of a mammal's body weight. No living thing can survive without water. Water allows molecules to move within our bodies, and it's also responsible for dissolving and transporting abiotic components between the hydrosphere and the biosphere. The movement of water through a biosphere is called a hydrologic cycle, and here's what it looks like. Take a look. We've got the atmosphere, we've got the hydrosphere, we've got the lithosphere. As I discuss the water cycle here, think about how these components are cycling through these different spheres. For example, water can evaporate out of a body of water and enter into a cloud, condense in the form of clouds. So we're moving from the hydrosphere up into the atmosphere. And that cloud condenses, maybe it starts to rain and sends precipitation down into the biosphere. Maybe some of that water runs off back into a larger body of water, maybe even enters back into the ocean. Some of that water will be infiltrated too through the lithosphere into groundwater reservoirs. The watershed is the area of land that drains into a particular body of water. Las Vegas is a watershed. Think about it. It rains here, right? Why not, right? The water cycle happens here. The Las Vegas watershed can be seen in the colored areas here on this map. The Las Vegas watershed will ultimately empty into the Lake Mead Reservoir. Let's talk about the carbon cycle. All right, so there are different processes, actually 6 processes that drive the carbon cycle. Make sure that you know and can describe and explain each of the 6 processes. As I go through each one, take notes on what's going on. Not only what's going on, but what's going on in the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the lithosphere. Let's first talk about photosynthesis and respiration. Photosynthesis and respiration can exist and happen both in the biosphere, and it can also happen in the hydrosphere as well. Think about it. On land, it happens through trees and leaves, plants, the producers. It's how carbon enters into the food web, for example. A leaf is able to take in new carbon dioxide and fix it into sugars, glucose specifically. It's food for themselves and for anything that might eat it. When they eat it, or when the plant uses the glucose or the sugar, it will undergo respiration, which breaks down that sugar back into carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide can then be fixed through photosynthesis again, and that cycle continues. It happens in the hydrosphere as well, with phytoplankton and algae are able to bring in dissolved carbon dioxide from the water and produce food, not just for themselves, but for anything else that might feed from it in the food web. This process can be very fast, photosynthesis and respiration, in terms of the other processes that drive the carbon cycle as well. Another process that drives the carbon cycle is exchange. This is when carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dissolves into a body of water like the ocean. And when that happens, it creates CaCO3, calcium carbonate. Some of it might. That carbon dioxide might also be used and enter into the food web by algae through photosynthesis as well. Another process that will drive the carbon cycle is sedimentation and burial. So think about it. In the last process, exchange, some of that carbon dioxide will enter into the ocean and combine with calcium ions. Those calcium carbonate ions could precipitate out of solution and become sediment on the bottom of the body of water. Some of it might even become buried as well. Think about what happens when buried carbon, when carbon is buried over time and pressure. Some of that carbon, that dead biomass, is going to transform into fossil fuels. Some of the calcium carbonate that comes out of solution here too and rests on the bottom might even turn into, through some compaction, limestone rock. Is another way to get carbon out of the atmosphere and into either the hydrosphere or lithosphere as well. All right, I'm losing my voice. Another one is, another process that drives the carbon cycle is extraction. This is what humans do. Humans remove fossil fuels from the lithosphere. That's okay, I suppose. The problem becomes when humans burn the fossil fuels. Burning the fossil fuels through a combustion reaction is going to release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere at a higher rate than what normal, regular processes would do. This anthropogenic process of burning fossil fuels and releasing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere is really the cause of climate change. And how does that happen? So combustion exists when fossil fuels and other biomass is burned and carbon dioxide enters into this back into the atmosphere again. So how does climate change actually work? Think back to our discussion on kinetic energy, the movement of particles in a system. Temperature is the average kinetic energy of particles. So if you have more particles, let's say in the atmosphere, by burning more carbon dioxide, burning fossil fuels and releasing more carbon dioxide, you now have more particles in the atmosphere that are able to retain heat. Right? If that happens, think about what happens. You increase the temperature. All right, we'll talk more about that later on. That is our notes for today. Make sure that you can describe how matter can cycle through Earth's spheres. Make sure that you can list the elements essential to life. Make sure that you can describe the water cycle and can describe the carbon cycle. Finally, make sure that you can explain the 6 processes behind carbon's movement through the different spheres. Thank you very much.